Well, it's time to fill you guys in on what's been going on with the Derek Chauvin trial, and the testimony is incredibly compelling. So, a new witness was called to the stand today in the Derek Chauvin trial. It was Dr. Martin Tobin, who's a medical expert, called to testify on what exactly killed George Floyd. Now, of course, all of us have seen the video of Derek Chauvin, the cop in Minnesota, kneeling on George Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes. And that led to George Floyd dying, that led to protests. And here we are today with Derek Chauvin, the ex-cop, now facing criminal charges. Now, the defense in this case has put forth the argument that what really led to George Floyd's death was the fact that he had been using fentanyl. He had been, he had experienced several overdoses prior to that violence taking place that day. And I think that the prosecution is doing a pretty good job bringing forward medical experts to tell the truth. So let's hear from Dr. Tobin and what he has to say.
And so if you look here on the first slide, you see that Mr. Floyd's nose, his face is directly face down on the street. It's not at any angle. In many of the calculations, I excluded the effect of his leg and his shoe because some of it was touching the ground, but here you can see none of it is touching the ground. So we're taking half his body weight plus the weight of his half the gear, and all of that is coming directly down on Mr. Floyd's neck. Mr. Floyd died from a low level of oxygen, and this caused damage to his brain that we see, and it also caused a PEA arrhythmia that caused his heart to stop.
Now, I show you that with the, I guess, caution that when you're dealing with murder charges, you need to prove that it happened beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So the burden of proof is incredibly high. And so what the defense is trying to do is essentially put reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors by saying that it wasn't just the fact that Chauvin did what he did. It was all of these other health conditions and the fact that he had used these substances that had led to his death or contributed to his death. That's what the defense is trying to do. Now, I obviously don't buy that argument, but that is how a lot of people who've been charged with murder tend to get off free because it's really easy to put reasonable doubt in jurors' heads. So we'll see how it plays out, but I did want to caution you with that.
Yeah, so this was a devastating witness for the defense. So unless the defense puts together a witness that could challenge Tobin, it would be shocking if Chauvin was not convicted. Shocking, because let me explain all the different ways that Tobin destroyed the Chauvin defense. So first of all, the defense came in and said, "Oh, well, how do you know that it wasn't fentanyl that caused it?" He says, "Oh, that's easy. You could see how much he's breathing before the neck is the knee is put on the neck, right? And so fentanyl pre the knee was not affecting his breathing at all, however much he had in his system." They say, "Oh yeah," and they teach you in law school not to ask questions you don't know the answer to, but apparently this defense attorney didn't get that class because he's like, "How about a heart condition? Couldn't a heart condition cause this?" And Tobin's like, "No, you see him breathing very clearly without any issues." And then he gives the numbers for his breathing. He's breathing at this rate that's 89, which is that of a normal person before Chauvin puts his knee on his neck and his back. Okay, so it definitely wasn't a heart condition, and it definitely wasn't fentanyl, etc. And he says he died because of a lack of oxygen. And the lack of oxygen is when you constrict the airwaves. And so this is really important too, also devastating. He said, look, you don't have to have the airway constricted 100%. That's why earlier George Floyd is saying, I can't breathe, which indicates that actually some of the airwave is still open, okay? But that doesn't mean that that's it, he can definitely breathe. Tobin explained that he lost 85% capacity to his lungs. And when he did, they stopped functioning. So he stopped getting oxygen to his brain, and that's why he died. So you don't have to close it 100% for the person to be choking the person. And that's what they did. And it depends on how long you put pressure that creates that percentage of blocking of his air tunnel, basically. And so when you hear that, you realize, oh, yeah, there's no question that they constricted his breathing, and that was definitively the cause of his death. They definitely killed him.
I want to go to the next video because this features more of Dr. Tobin's testimony, and he specifically mentions how handcuffs are part of this equation as well. Let's take a look.
What I observed is particularly is in terms of the hands of the police and the handcuffs, particularly on the left side. So they were forcing his left wrist up into his chest, forcing it in tight against his chest, forcing it high up. And you have to keep in mind that the opposite side of this is the street. So he was being squashed between the two sides. And so this meant that he couldn't exert his pump handle, because the street totally blocked his pump handle. There was no way he could do any front to back movement. And again, the way they were pressing in on the back, there was absolutely no way that he could do any front to back movement. Then in addition, because of the knee that was rammed in against the left side of his chest, sometimes the knee was down on the arm or in against the chest. So this would have the same effect. So basically, on the left side of his lung, it was almost like a surgical pneumonectomy. It was almost to the effect as if a surgeon had gone in and removed the lung. Not quite, but along those lines.
Again, that's incredibly compelling testimony. We're talking about a pulmonary doctor, basically, and very specifically pointing to the fact that his inability to breathe is what led to his death. And that is important testimony to rebut the nonsense coming from the defense.
And let me give you one more direct quote about what I was explaining on the airway and how it was blocked. Tobin said, if you get 85% narrowing, now you see that the effort to breathe increases 7.5 times compared with what it was with no narrowing. So the breathing gets harder and harder and harder until you just can't breathe anymore. And it's actually a suffocation that takes longer and hence is more painful and more torturous. And then they asked him one more time, they said, now would a healthy person who suffered this same exact act die? And he said, yes. It doesn't have anything to do with his health. If you constrict the airway to this degree for this length, any person would die. And so, and by the way, Tobin has taken no money for his testimony. He wanted to make sure that everybody, like, he didn't want to introduce any idea of bias. This is a really important case. And so that's great. And that's awesome of him to do that. And at the end of the questioning, Tobin said to the defense attorney, it seems like you're purposely trying to confuse me. And the defense attorney said, no, I wasn't trying to do that. It's just been a really long week. And for the defense, it has been. Yeah. It was by the way, it was a really long 9 minutes and 50 seconds for George Floyd. So the degree to which I have no sympathy for the defense is immeasurable.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.